Oh, here we go. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Daphne Lazar-Price. I'm the Executive Director of JOFA, and this afternoon it's my privilege and my pleasure to welcome Beatrice Weber to lead this afternoon's webinar. Beatrice Weber is a mother of 10 children and a grandmother of 7. She was raised in an ultra-orthodox community and was married off in an arranged marriage before graduating high school to a rabbi. Despite severe opposition from the community and her family, she left her marriage several years ago and currently lives in Brooklyn with her 2 younger children. After many years of being a stay-at-home mom, she began attending college and eventually obtained an MBA in 2015. She has worked in several nonprofits and currently is a director in a large clinic in Brooklyn. She is passionate about improving lives and she's passionate about improving her life and the lives of others by embracing ever-evolving educational experiences, self-improvement activities, and spiritual practices. She writes and speaks about the importance of finding financial, emotional, and spiritual freedom. Beatrice is going to spend this afternoon speaking with us about some of the challenges in the ultra-orthodox community, educating boys, and I'm sure that she will spend a lot more, some more time talking about her own personal experience as well. Without further ado, I'm going to hand this off to Beatrice.
Thank you, Daphne, for that wonderful introduction, and I am really happy to be here with all of you. Yeah, I just feel like I need to make a little reference to what's going on around us. So I really appreciate all of you who have tuned in and are taking the time to be here and have this conversation around some of the issues affecting our communities. So thank you for that, and I hope you're all staying healthy and well during this time. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the current state of education in the Hasidic/ultra-Orthodox community. And I'm also going to be talking about the implication it has and we have all our children at home, so thank you very much. And the implication it has for both the ultra-Orthodox community and the larger Jewish community as well. So first I'll be clearing up some of the misconceptions that you may have heard regarding this issue. I'll also be telling you about a lawsuit that I recently filed in connection with this issue. I'll be talking to you about some of my personal stories to help you understand the social dynamics that prevent people from speaking up and that this situation continues perpetuating itself, and also be talking to you about what you can do to help if this issue calls to you and you feel like you want to do something, what you can actually do to help. So first of all, I just want you to think about this. I thought we can have a collaborative conversation, but I understand it's a little difficult in this venue. So just if you can think about this, like how many of you have a close relationship, whether it's a relative, a friend, but I mean a really close relationship with somebody from the Hasidic or ultra-Orthodox community? And the reason I'm asking that question and asking you to consider it is because oftentimes when we come from a similar culture, we have we think that we understand that culture really well. And we think we know it and we can explain it. And that's why it's really important to understand that we all know there are cultures, right? And then there are so many little subcultures. And so as we go into this, I ask that you have an open mind and whatever conceptions you may have had about the Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox community, kind of to set those aside and be open to hearing kind of a very personal perspective of what I'll tell you from my experiences growing up in the community, raising my children in the community. So as I was introduced, I'm Beatrice Weber, a mother of 10, 6 of them boys, and grandmother of 7. My children and grandchildren all attend or have attended Hasidic yeshivas in Brooklyn, Rockland County, and in Lakewood, New Jersey. The boys receive between 4 to 6 hours of instruction in secular education. And I'll be going a little bit further into what that actually means. And it's usually basic English and math for 5 of their elementary school years. And they have no education at all in high school. So what they're
Sorry, Beatrice, I just want to correct. When you say 4 to 6 hours, you mean over what course of time?
Did I say a day or a week? I don't hear you. I think you're muted.
Sorry.
You just said 4 to It's over a week.
Thank you.
So, oh, thank you. Thank you for asking that question. So, and I'll give you a little bit of an idea of what that looks like. But first, before I do that, I just want to clarify something off the bat right away, because the first thing I always hear from people is like, well, my cousin went to yeshiva and then he went to Harvard, right? Or my cousin went to yeshiva and now he's a doctor. So when we talk yeshivas, we mean a very, very broad range. That term is used very loosely and across a very, very broad range of spaces. So we talk about from the, modern Orthodox, open Orthodox communities to the Hasidic ultra-Orthodox communities. And what that looks like across that entire range is you go from some school systems, and I won't mention names because that's not important, but some school systems where they are teaching a very, very robust Judaic and secular studies program. So they are actually receiving a true dual education where their religious Jewish studies are very robust and complete. And then they spend many hours following the guidelines of New York State and perhaps even surpassing what's taught in a regular public school. And they, take their regents, take their SATs, and end up at the end of yeshiva with all the opportunities available for them to be able to attend whichever college they'd like. It continues on with some school system giving somewhat of a secular education where the kids are maybe receiving 2 to 3 hours a day, where they are being taught by certified teachers or teachers with some sort of degrees, and later on, and receiving their education through high school. What I'm talking about here in this talk here, just to be very clear, this is a situation that affects about 100,000 students in New York City, and I don't know the numbers in Rockland County, in Orange County, in Lakewood, New Jersey, that follow similar school system. These are specific school systems that have approximately an hour and a quarter, I would say, a day between Monday and Thursday, between 2nd grade and 7th grade, okay? They pride themselves on giving a very strong Judaic education, and that obviously ranges between each school, but on the whole, they spend most of their day. I'll talk about what my son's particular day looks like, and this is similar to what all of my son's days have looked like in whichever school they were, and they were in several schools. I used to live in Rockland, now I live in Brooklyn, so this was not only in one school. Until 3:45, okay, he starts his day at 8 o'clock, he goes on the bus. Okay, and from 8 till 3:45, what he does is a combination of Chumash, Mishnah, when he gets a little older, Talmud, prayers, davening, break, lunch, recess, whatever they have, with his Rabbi, okay, with his rabbi who has had a lot of experience and education in teaching children. Okay, so my children have, on the whole, had very experienced, even though they have not had any formal education, his teachers, they still have had a lot of years of experience in teaching these Judaic studies. At 3:45, they break. They get a little break where they get a snack, and that's when they start the secular studies, which generally consist of basic math and basic English. By English, they're not reading Shakespeare or anything near that. By the time they're done, they're probably at a 2nd or 3rd grade level, again, depending on which schools they are. My son is considered somewhat of a stronger, where they do really care about the education, but they have never, like my older sons who were in the school, they've never gotten up to writing an essay or understanding what it means to analyze reading comprehension that generally is done in 5th or 6th grade. It's really about getting the very, very basics of knowing how to read and knowing how to write. Okay, my children do speak English. I've always spoken English to them. It's a little bit of a funny, I guess I'll explain it. So I lived in Israel when I first got married, and I was speaking to my children in Yiddish, okay, as is traditionally done, where at home they only speak Yiddish. And my daughter turned 4, and I realized, oh my gosh, she doesn't speak any English, nothing, right? Because she was learning Hebrew, from the streets, and she was learning Yiddish from me. So that's when I switched to English. And then when we moved to Rockland, when my oldest was 10, it just was too hard for me to switch back to Yiddish. So because of that, my boys always have spoken English. and I've spoken English, reasonably well, which has obviously helped them. But you'll have many teenage boys specifically, and I'll soon talk about the differences of education between boys and girls, who really don't have the basics. And I'm talking about they'll come into a doctor's office and will be unable to fill out the registration form. I recently spoke to somebody who used to work, I work in a clinic in the community, to a dentist that used to work with us. So I asked him, how do I describe this situation? He's from a traditional Jewish background. So I was like, what was your experience? Like, how would you see this? And how would I describe this best to people who may not have a reference point? And I understand there is going to be a lot of people listening to this, and you may be from all spectrums of society. So forgive me if I'm being repetitive, and these are things that but I think it's important to really have a framework of where we're coming from. And he said to me, you know what, it was really like just working in a foreign country. He said, I would have teenage boys coming to me, and because they were unable to speak in English, they had to bring their younger sisters to explain to me like where the pain was and how it was impacting them. So it was really so astounding this is Brooklyn, right? Like, we think that we're all in the same boat. We think we're all learning the same thing. We all understand the same thing, but actually the discrepancies are huge. And so I have some old adult sons. So some of my adult sons have chosen to be Talmudic scholars, okay, and learn all day. And for that, they've been very well prepared, and they've been very successful at that. One of my sons is married, and is being supported financially, and he has the luxury of doing that. And, he's very bright, and that's great. I have some of my other sons that have wanted to go to work and have really struggled with getting that job, starting that business without having the basic skills and understanding the basic critical thinking skills, and no high school diploma. You're really at a loss. Minimum wage jobs are really the way to go, and really struggling and grappling and figuring out a way to do it. I have my 18-year-old son. When he was about 16, he was really excited. He was like, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to do this. But then when he turned 18 and he realized the enormity of what it would take for him to do that, he just gave up. And I'm still hopeful that he'll have the courage to do it, because it is possible to be done. I have friends that have done it. You can do it. And I hope he's going to have the courage to do it. But for now, it's just so sad to see that the dreams that he had for himself are just not, they don't feel like they're within his reach, and he's given up. So my youngest son is 7 years old. And in September of this year, he was still 6 then, I filed a lawsuit against the Department of Education at my son's school, claiming that he was not receiving an adequate education, hoping to make changes. I requested the curriculum several times, and knowing of my older son's experiences, I decided this was the only way that I can actually make changes in my son's educational world, and also for all the other young boys in his community. Just to clarify his teacher, I recently met his teacher, really nice person. Nice person, speaks in a heavily accented English. In the morning, he teaches a religious studies class, a younger class. And in the afternoon, he moonlights as a secular studies teacher. He has gone through the same system as my sons have gone through, meaning he received his 5 years of, an hour and a bit of education, and for his 5 years of that bit of education that I described previously. And because they're considered a nice person, somebody that could control the class, somebody that can manage well, he's actually the teacher. He was actually really excited when I went down to the classroom to show me what he was teaching them and how he was teaching them. But in fact, he has not been trained properly, and is only giving over what he knows. When I lived up in Rockland, again, because my sons, kind of absorbed the English from at home, they had a little bit of a better grasp of the language than most of their classmates. I remember one of my older sons, when he was in 3rd grade, telling me that the teacher always asked him to read because he knew how to read better than the teacher. It was easier. It was like, you do it. That was his understanding of what was going on, that he was given, the opportunity to read. I also met with my son's principal recently, and also, again, he was really excited to tell me how passionate he was about education and how much it meant to him. He told me, I run 2 businesses, but because this is so important to me, I come in for a few hours a week to make sure that the children are getting an education. But again, no background, no educational background, no high school at all, from a similar background, again, trying their best, thinking that they know what they can give over, but really ultimately providing a very lacking education for the students. Recently, as my son is learning how to read, he came home and said to me, I know that I'm supposed to read this word the, but I want you to know that from now on, I'm going to be saying duh, because that's how my teacher taught me. I've also often heard him accent his English or not speak properly in English when he's together with his friends. Again, the level of what they're learning is just the teachers are teaching whatever they know, and they don't know what they don't know. So there's different issues I wanted to discuss about the different issues that come up as a result. And I'm sure there are many more, but these are the ones that I've seen. And again, just I don't speak on behalf of anybody. I'm not the ultimate authority on this issue. I'm just talking about my experiences with this. First of all, there's a great reliance on social services within the community. Having Medicaid, having food stamps is almost the norm. Again, there are entrepreneurs that do very well. So there are obviously exceptions, but it's very typical for people to get married and need to rely on social services as they have seen their parents do. There's also the issue of voting blocks, and that's an issue that affects the community and affects all of us. Bigger than the Jewish community, it affects really society as a whole. And if only for this, the government should actually intervene and be firm about the laws that they have created, which I'll be talking about soon. There's a great, what happens is because people have not been taught civics, they've not been taught the different branches of the government, they have not learned any of that. When elections come around and their leaders tell them who they should vote for and how they should think about these issues, they just take it all in because they have never been walked through how to think critically, how to analyze something, and how to view different political issues. There's also health issues, and just to bring this up now because it's so timely. If you've never learned science, if you've never learned what a theory is, what a hypothesis is, if you've never learned to trust science at all, when health issues come about, you're going to listen to what your leaders say and not actually find out the information and really understand these issues on your own. Even simple issues as what's going on now with the virus, understanding how viruses are transmitted and how they may impact you and how they may impact your health. It took so much longer for the ultra-orthodox community to really grasp what was going on and how they need to take care of themselves. Thankfully, by now they've gotten it, and things have really changed over the last week. But it was really sad to see adults who really have never understood science deal with this issue. Sorry, I'm just going to turn off the water here.
No, I need water.
1 second, sweetheart. I'm online. You can't talk.
So then, you're in the middle of a kitchen.
Okay.
I need water.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to deal with this for a second.
It's okay. You go take care.
We're all home, right?
We're all home. We're all home.
It's the middle of the kitchen.
I said to one and be quiet.
Okay.
Okay.
You're in the middle of the kitchen. Go to your room. We're out of your room.
Okay. I'm going to just continue right along like we're all trying to do here, right?
Again, you do whatever it is that you need to do.
Thank you. So my 2 kids are home, everybody. Surprise, surprise. which I'm grateful for. Okay, which I'm grateful for because the schools took a while longer to close down, again, because of this issue, really not trusting what science says, rather trusting the leaders. And it took a while for the leaders to really, take charge. There was an issue, if perhaps you remember, with the vaccinations. That was actually a very minority group. I want to clarify that. I work in a clinic. I know it was a really very minority group that was so strongly opposed to the vaccination. And what was most sad was and you may have heard some of the news reports and women speaking, they really meant well for their children and believed that they had the best knowledge available. And again, there was a small group of people that were really passionate anti-vaxxers that you have everywhere in every society, but because they don't understand the science behind this, they really got a lot of people on board, and it took a lot of explaining, and they had people coming into the community and really explaining to them, like, what does an experiment actually mean? And just because there was one, experiment or study that showed something that was done with 20 people, that's not what actually, that's not where to actually take your direction from. So these are real issues that actually, impact people's day-to-day lives. And I will say this, it is possible to get an education later on. I have friends that have done it. I have friends from this type of background education that have, as adults, done it. I mean, I myself have not graduated high school, though even I didn't graduate high school, I got way more of an education than any of my boys got. But I do believe, I'm the first person to believe in the possibility of doing whatever you want, when you want, and the possibility of any reasonably intelligent person getting that high school diploma later on as an adult. But it is a lot harder and it takes a lot more. And by not giving the education, people are so much more at a disadvantage in terms of job opportunities, in terms of just having that basic critical thinking skills and how to deal with life. Some of you may be asking if what I'm saying is true, right? That boys are actually only receiving just over an hour of this education a week. Just over an hour a day. So we're talking about 4 to 6 hours a week. They're not being taught by certified teachers. Like, isn't education a Jewish value for everybody? Like, why are people not speaking up? And not only are people not speaking up, but when people do speak up about this issue, instead of actually accepting it and understanding it, there's a lot of pushback about it. So I'm going to be talking, in order to really understand it, it's important to kind of open the curtain and take a walk into what are the societal factors that are causing this lack of wanting to take action. As some of you may know, there are organizations that have taken the lead to try to make these changes. And instead of being embraced and parents jumping on board, at least publicly, parents have been really, really silent. And on the contrary, have really vilified any changes. And I'll be walking you through some of the societal issues that I see. And some of the societal issues may be familiar to you because every single society has issues. And some of them may be something new for you, and you'll perhaps learn something from this. So first of all, life is really, really planned for you. And any deviation comes at a very, very huge risk. Okay? So when I'm talking about life is really planned for you, who you're going to name your child after, okay? There's a very clear structure, right? So from the moment you're born, like you don't have a choice about who you're going to name your child after, okay? It's either going to be your mother's mother, right? Or if that's not available, it will be the next one. I was never able to choose what to name my children. You had to do something. And if I would have chosen a name that was different, it would have been, such shame and embarrassment. It's funny, just a funny anecdote about my name. So my Hebrew name is Batsheva, which is, when I was named, right, all those years back, was considered like a more modern Israeli name. And I remember somebody, like a relative, coming over to my mother and saying, "Oh, you're so smart. You didn't follow the rules. Like, you called her, a name that you really liked." And she was like, "Oh, no. That's actually my mother's grandmother." So it's really like from who you name, from who you choose as the mohel to, for the bris, for the circumcision of your child, which hall you use to do which school. People often say, well, can't you choose to send your child to a different school? And the answer is really no. Again, like where you're raised and where you come from, you have to send your child to the school. Now you can choose not to. You can choose to break the rules. I broke the rules, right? When I divorced at 40, that was a huge breaking of the rules, okay? I was married 22 years, had 10 children, and was married to a rabbi, to a Rosh Kollel in the community. When I did that, I experienced the full ramifications of what happens to somebody when they break those rules, okay? And I'll just I will share with you what I personally experienced, just because I want you to understand the extent to which this social ostracization and expectation goes, and why people are so afraid. Um, when I left my marriage, it was, when I say that it was against the will of the community and the family and my family, it was just as I say it was. I had my father come to court and my children come to court together with my ex-husband as I was trying to gain custody of my younger children. I had, through the Bet Din, the Jewish courts, custody was given to my ex-husband of my younger children, which was quickly reversed by the family court system. But that was I stood the chance of losing custody of my children. I was sent to a psychiatrist friend of the rabbi to deal with me. And thank goodness I had my wits about me and the doctor I trusted. So I was not put on the antipsychotic medication that they wanted to put me on. These are the very, very, very real ramifications that people from the ultra-orthodox community experience when they speak up. So you can probably understand why, even if education means a lot to you, and even if it's important to you, you'll be quiet, you won't say anything, and you'll just follow along with what's being said. I'm sorry, I just have my son here. I've not been told of my children's wedding, have not been told of some of my grandchildren's birth. And again, this is not just me, because other people don't speak up. People are it's kind of like expected, right? You speak up, you do this, you violated those spoken or unspoken rules, so then you have to deal with the consequences.
Beatrice, I don't know if you're seeing in the comments, but people are really applauding you for speaking up. So we'll get to it more in the Q&A, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of chizuk right now.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Now, I'll just say this. I'm grateful that I had the strength and the ability to kind of deal with this and get past it, because 5 years ago, it's almost 6 years ago, when I was like in the thick of all of this, 5.5 years ago, it was so challenging that I didn't know if I'd make it through whole and strong. And I'm always grateful that I had that inner strength and was able to. And now at this point, it's kind of when everything was done to you, you're just able to speak up, you're able to share the truth, and I'm able to actually see things the way they are and speak up about them. So that's one advantage of all of this happened. I have now all the freedom in the world, because once you've experienced something like that, it does give you a certain freedom. Okay, 1 minute, please. No, not now, later. Thank you. Okay, the next concept that I'd like to bring up is there is a tremendous fear of outsiders and any outside ideas. And this fear is, it's so great that when community leaders decide on a certain course of action, it's very, very easy to get the community on board. And this fear is very historical, the way I see it. And again, I'm not the expert, but kind of what I've read and what I've experienced and seen is it's a lot related to the Holocaust trauma. Like most of the people that are part of the ultra-orthodox community are very much, I know for me, all my grandparents were impacted by the Holocaust in some way or another. Some of them in concentration camps, some of them had to flee their where they lived again and again. Some of them hid through the Holocaust. So there's this tremendous fear, and it's very easy to capitalize on that fear. I mean, when organizations wanted to start working on this issue, and community leaders did not want the changes, and they didn't want the changes for a variety of reasons, which I can hypothesize about why they didn't want the changes. Nobody wants changes. Nobody wants government regulations. Nobody wants the government to come in and change how you're doing schooling, because that's kind of the background to my story and to filing this lawsuit, was understanding that there actually are rules how private schools need to teach. And those rules have not been enforced for decades, and almost a century. And nobody wants the government to come in, right? Private schools are getting a lot of resources and a lot of a lot of money, and nobody wants anybody from the outside to come in. And there is also a fear, and I want to, at this point, kind of nullify that fear. That is that fear that they'll be forced to teach things that are against their values, such as evolution, such as different lifestyles, gender issues. It's actually not true, and I do have like a one-pager if anybody's interested in knowing what the actual rules are in regards to what the state expects of education. It's none of that. It's really just about certain basic subjects that should be taught. But again, it's so easy to capitalize on these fears, and honestly, even with what's going on, where the government is, telling people you have to close your shuls, your synagogues, right? You have to close them. Again, that fear is coming up, where there's this kind of old historical fear, like the government is closing us, making us close our synagogues. Again, very much reminiscent of what Jews have experienced for centuries back in Europe, and kind of those fears are very, very easy to capitalize on. There were signs in the community of like burning buildings. They're going to lock with big locks, like surrounding the schools, implying that, well, if educational changes are made, your school's going to close down. Education as we know it, when we won't be able to provide the Jewish education that we're providing anymore. So really a lot of this hysteria that's come up, and if you're a parent and you see this, you really believe it. I recently spoke to a friend of mine who's a very educated, she's a very intelligent person. And, when I started telling her that I'm involved with this issue and I recently filed a lawsuit, she was like, really? No, it's terrible. You don't know what we'll have to teach our kids. And I'm like, no. Don't you know that that's just propaganda? That's actually not true. So it's really infiltrated every area of the Orthodox community. And what's so sad is that it's even infiltrated into parts of the Orthodox community where they actually provide a very strong and robust education to their students. And it's caused them to stand in opposition to any changes to what's going on in the ultra-Orthodox Hasidic community. And it's just it's so tragic that meanwhile, people from certain parts of the Orthodox community are providing a very good education for their children, right? Their children are getting a very robust dual education, but by standing up in opposition to any changes, they're really helping to deprive these tens of thousands, close to 100,000 students from getting an education. Letters were sent out to parents. And these letters, actually, what I found out recently, were not only sent in the ultra-Orthodox community, but were actually sent across the board, even in very modern Orthodox communities, really telling parents, and I'll go into it a little bit as well, but really telling parents, if we allow this, your children's records will be made public. In the ultra-Orthodox community, like, we will never be able to provide the same level of education, really forcing parents to sign those letters. You may have heard that a lot of letters went out to the government, and my son was promised a treat if he brings back the letters, and I had to do a lot of calming down because I was obviously not going to sign it. So there's a lot of, again, capitalizing on the fear that's the community. Also, a little bit to describe my childhood. I remember, like, when I'd go to the park as a kid, if somebody from outside of the community that didn't look exactly like me, right, that wasn't from the religious ultra-Orthodox community, would come over and play with me, you just run away. And like, nobody had to tell me to do that. It was just an automatic reflex that anybody on the outside is scary, is dangerous, and we need to stay away from them. And I also, like, if any of you that are not from the community come to maybe a community like I live in, like Williamsburg, and you'll see people are maybe not as friendly or not as welcoming. It's really not that they're bad and angry at you and kind of have all these negative. They're really more afraid than anything else. I mean, I recently had a very this was a very unnerving experience where I was walking with my son. At this point, I don't cover my hair, so I don't look like people from the community, and my son does. And I was holding his hand, and this woman ran over in a panic and started talking to my son in Yiddish, and like, who's this person holding your hand? Are you okay? Are you okay? And then she asked me, who are you? Do you work? And I'm usually very polite, but at this, like, I really had to calm my son down. And I was just like, I'm his mother. Everything's fine in Yiddish. I said that to her. So again, this tremendous fear of outsiders can really be used to really get people on board with whatever needs to happen, which is really, it's not fair, but just the way it is. I also want to explain something that some of you may know, but this may be news for some of you. So education in the ultra-Orthodox community is very much an arm of religion. Okay, principals, teachers are chosen based on their religious affiliations and their personality. Education is never required or considered important. Okay, I have never had a principal that actually went to school to get an education. You know, my elementary school principal was a stern, firm, smart, loud woman. She was a principal because of who she was as a person. My high school principal was a kindly, elderly rabbi, and was chosen to be a principal because he knew how to talk nicely to the girls and keep everything in line. Again, no education in terms of curriculum. You know, they try their best. I remember when I was young and there was a new school opening up in the town that I lived in, my mother was really excited because she was able to choose the books that they were going to be using. And again, my mother was an assistant principal for many years, a teacher for many years. And again, she finished high school when she was 17. So not as a result of her education, but rather a result of who she was as a person. I also want to point out here at this point the great discrepancy between the education given to men and education given to women, to girls and to boys, and also the roles that the women play versus the roles that the men play. Okay, the men very much are in charge of, and this goes back to kind of everything's laid out for you, the men are very much in charge of anything related to the religion, okay, which education will come under that umbrella. So even the girls' schools, which I'll discuss how they're run soon, they may have women as principals. It is actually the men that are making the decisions as to what is being taught there. I remember my mother working in a school up in Rockland, and she very much wanted that they should be giving the Regents exams. She got into the school, and throughout the 4 years of high school, they were using the exact same books. So that was a big priority for her. But I remember how she had to go to the rabbi that was running the school and beg and push and convince and cajole to get them to actually agree to bring that on. So there's no women making decisions. They may have an influence, but they will never, ever be the ones making the decision. And I believe very strongly that if women in the community were the ones making the decision, our boys' education would work very differently, because the women, they have a different perspective, and kind of their caring for their children is very, very different. And I think that the education would look very, very differently if that's the way it was done. But honestly, because it's so ingrained with women having their specific roles and men having their specific roles, I don't know if that would ever change. Women's roles, on the other hand, are very much, especially in the Hasidic community, which is what I'm referring to, very much around child raising their children, keeping their children healthy, keeping their children well. Again, if any of you were privy to what was going on during the measles epidemic last year, it was the women that were always talking about the issue, because again, measles, right? Healthcare, women, and men were really taking a back seat, and very much, this is the women's department. Whatever my wife says about how to take care of the children, I'm on board with that. But when it comes to anything related to religion, anything related to education, now there are other communities which would be, again, part of the ultra-Orthodox community, but not part of the Hasidic community, where women there have very much a role in terms of working, being the primary breadwinner in addition to the child raising, and the men stay and are Talmudic scholars for much longer. And the boys' education, again, is very similar, where they are learning the Talmud as they get older, very little of the secular education, and the expectation is that the women fill in. Again, where I currently live and where my son currently goes to school, what the women do is very much, they may work a little bit as secretaries towards the end, towards the beginning of their marriage and as young girls, but eventually their entire role is about caring for their children and caring for their homes. I just have to say this because I thought this was something that really speaks to this issue of education. So somebody said to me, these girls coming out of these schools, they are the best secretaries. And I was like, yes, of course they're the best secretaries, because if they were able to get the education and able to do what they actually could, they'd be going to medical school, because they're intelligent, smart, but the limited education and limited opportunities they have make a secretary being the highest level of a job that they can get. So you have really, really bright girls going for those kind of jobs. And again, just to clarify, the girls definitely get a little bit more of an education throughout the years. They're the ones that are expected to know how to speak English, right? To know how to fill out those forms, to know how to communicate with the rest of the world, but really not enough to allow them to continue on to a higher education. And again, the higher education is not encouraged for them at all. So in regards to what you can do if this issue calls to you, if you'd like to help out, if you'd like to do something, is first of all, speak to the people in the communities. Unfortunately, what's happened is that some of the big private schools, including the organizations that support them and give them their certifications, for lack of a better word, I hope I'm saying the right word, but the ones that certify them as private schools have really stood very strongly against having any changes to how the government oversees these schools, to ensure that they do cover, the couple of basic subjects. Speak out about this issue. All the myths and all the falsehoods that are being spread about this are not true. You can have a very strong dual education. There are many, many models of this here in New York and all over the world, where you have students getting a very strong Judaic education and a very strong secular education. It is very possible. You can still teach all the Jewish subjects and topics, and also provide for a very, very robust education that is very much in line with what students need to go for a higher education, if that's what they would like. And again, these parents can't speak up. And if they do speak up, they often speak up privately, silently. People will tell you, they'll speak up in forums where they can be anonymous, but they're too afraid to speak up publicly. Speak to your politicians. Politicians need to know that this is not just an issue that only several people are concerned about and that so many people are against. They need to know so when you hear, there are letters being sent to politicians, you send a letter claiming your support, that changes should be made, that every student in New York State deserves to have an education. Compulsory education was passed as a law over 100 years ago. Like, this is old news, right? We have decided as a culture that we want to give every child an education. And the fact that schools that are not giving an education are being called schools is a terrible detriment to our children and to our society as a whole. And by speaking up and becoming educated about this issue, you can really help make changes. I do have a one-pager. If anybody's interested in that, I can send it to you, that just speaks more about the technicalities of this issue and and clarifies any other questions you might have. So thank you very much for listening. And I believe we are opening up for Q&A right now.
Yes, thank you so much, Beatrice. To anybody who's watching on Facebook, if you want to post your questions in the Facebook chat or in the Facebook page, you're welcome to do so. So first of all, that was a lot of information, a lot of very helpful information. And I think a lot of very eye-opening information, especially for those of us who are not in the Hasidic community. So just spend another minute on what Jews who are from and not part of Brooklyn or Rockland County or Lakewood, even though those are not necessarily, the other communities are not necessarily the ones that you're referring to, but what can we, those of us who live in Silver Spring or who live in Chicago or who live in elsewhere, do to help in order to make sure that all of our Jewish brothers and sisters are getting a proper education?
Well, there are online spaces where people talk about this issue. And they're just to, when I posted this event, right, I right away got pushback from people like, I'm so glad my child is getting a yeshiva education. I don't have to teach them about alternative lifestyles, right? Which is just like, it's a straw man. Like, that has nothing, they can actually not teach evolution and alternative lifestyle. That's actually very clearly written in the law. So you can speak up in those spaces and say, no, actually, that's not the way it is. And I mean, my approach is not to be combative. That's just the way I am, because I think it's just really that people have been really but just being given false information using fear tactics. So I think maybe online spaces is this also I just seems to be an issue in particular spaces, meaning outside of this country, in a lot of different places, this is not as much of an issue where children are receiving a dual education. So I don't know what's going on in those particular states all over the world, but definitely speaking up. There also, is an organization which I believe is on the one pager that you can support, and they can perhaps guide you what you can do in your particular state. Yeah.
Sure. Ashley, can you spend a minute on what kind of sex education the kids do get? Do they learn about kids of the opposite gender? Do they learn about healthy relationships? We're not talking about LGBT plus. We're not talking about.
No.
But what do the boys in yeshiva learn about girls, and what do the girls learn about boys?
I can speak to my experience and my children's experience. The idea is that there's complete segregation between the genders, right? So we don't talk about that. Boys, interestingly enough, because they learn the Talmud and they learn Gemara, that's kind of where they get their reference points from. But there's not, and I've heard that. I have a friend that sent her son to a modern Orthodox high school, like unlike her younger children. She's like, oh my gosh, they have a class, right, on relationships and how to treat the opposite sex, right, how to treat girls. And she was like, wow. I'm like, no, they don't even go there at all. Yeah. Yeah, so they really are learning just based on kind of what they learn through the side. I mean, my son came home and said to me something about, oh, well, women can't learn Mishnah, right? Women don't know Mishnah. He told me women don't know. Well, I'm like, yes, well, they haven't been taught, and they don't know because they haven't been taught. But again, he's young, he's 7. And he just started learning Mishnah, but already at that age, it's made very clear. There are very big differences. There are certain things that women are allowed to do, men are allowed to do, women do well. So there isn't any effort to do that at all. And honestly, I don't even want to go there with this topic, because that's a whole nother conversation. That's a whole nother conversation, on the gender issues and all of that, which is an important conversation for sure. But again, yeah.
All right, well, then if you'll indulge me a slight other tangent related to gender issues, how does the disparity in the education impact girls and women and mothers?
Well, first of all, there's a very heavy load on women. Okay. Families are also often struggling financially, and if you're struggling financially as a woman with a large family, you are working really, really hard, right? I mean, now I live with my 2 younger children, but remembering when I was, with all my children and trying to manage and trying to stretch that dollar a little further, right? Because I remember trying to encourage my ex-husband to maybe bring in a little more money. It was just, the idea was so foreign to him. And the truth is, he didn't have much of a background to go by anyway. He was a Talmudic scholar. He was getting paid for that. To do more than that seemed way beyond. So I think that would be a number one issue. And how that would affect women, that as they grow up in the community, the burden is really a lot on them. And there's also, how do I describe this? It becomes a little bit of a chauvinistic attitude, where the women, oh, so enough so you can take care of kind of these mundane things, right? That I can't, because I've never gotten this. So it's almost like the women are taught just enough to be of use to society and kind of the men they marry or the community, but not enough to allow them to have their choices in terms of career or in terms of anything like that. So that would be another real very real life impact. Yeah.
Got it. I want to ask a slightly different question, actually a much different question. If we assume, and I don't want to use the term fundamentalist, but what you described, excuse me, is really a lot of like ingrained, conditioned behavior that comes from a place of fear. Um, if we assume that the people leading the charge there will never change, then how can government redirect resources away from like hide and seek enforcement games and towards containing the negative impacts on the wider society?
So that goes into the whole question of how to, okay, so let's, right now, what's going on really is the government's turning a blind eye. I mean, there's no other way to put it. The government's, I filed a lawsuit in September. It's sitting there. It's probably going to sit there like, I don't know. I don't know how long till my son graduates, which is ridiculous. Like and this is like a personal lawsuit, right? So, and this is an issue that they know about. Everybody knows about it, and they know, if they didn't know about it, now that it has come to their attention, they definitely know about it. They know about it. The government knows about it. They're turning a blind eye for various mainly political reasons, maybe financial reasons too, but mainly political reasons. So the first thing is, how do you enforce, right? What do you do to enforce?
Mhm.
And how do you clarify, first of all, how do you clarify what you're going to enforce? Because that was also, I don't know if you remember, maybe you don't, but I remember when there was like, oh, they're going to have to learn 7 hours of secular studies. That was something that was being spread all around. So everybody was freaking out. Well, if we have to teach 7 hours of secular studies, when will we teach our Judaic studies? Again, that was just like something that was just somebody said off the cuff that was actually not true and not reality. So that's the first question. Like, how will they determine what needs to be taught? How will they determine how to enforce it? What will be the mechanisms? And on the one page, there's a little more clarity about some of the suggested mechanisms, like coming in, getting a curriculum, and then coming in every 5 years and just making sure that certain subjects are being taught and being covered. Maybe, I don't even think their regulations are what type of teachers they have to have. But and then once you're actually enforcing things, then you can talk about what are the mechanisms to ensure that there's actual compliance. Right? And if there's not actual compliance, what happens? Are you still considered a school? I mean, I know, I grew up in Canada, and in Canada, like the private schools didn't get any funding. Like we didn't get any textbooks or any school buses or any food or any extra services in the school, nothing.
That's province by province, though.
I'm sorry?
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Toronto.
Yeah, so I also grew up in Toronto, but in Quebec, we know that it was different because it's province by province.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. But here, the schools get a lot of money from the government. They're not directly funded, but they get a lot of money. Yeah, but even so, I went to an ultra-orthodox school. We still had to have certain subjects, otherwise we wouldn't be considered a school. Like we had to have. I remember physical education. We had to have four classes a week, and it wasn't optional. You had to have it. We had to do certain number of classes in math. They don't have any such structure in New York that's enforced at all. It's just non-existent. So I think that would be the first thing. How do you clarify and start to enforce? And when you start to enforce, how do you, I mean, see, driving away funds is going to be complicated. And again, I'm just a layman, I'm not a politician, but the funding are received from many different streams. It's not just that there's like one funding stream for the school systems, right? There's like, I'm sure more than a handful of different organizations, or not organizations, government entities that are plugging into the school, and that's how they're receiving it. There's the federal government, right? There's the state, and all of these are different mechanisms. I see Barbara. You're welcome, Barbara. Thank you. So how do you put a halt to all of those at one time? Like in theory, that's maybe what should be done, right? If you're not following the right, if you own a restaurant, right, and you're not following the rules, right, something's going to happen to you. You're not just going to continue operating like normal. Like you're actually going to have consequences. It just is complicated because, I don't know, New York State is complicated. I feel like the states in general, they're complicated the way the funding sources are available. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a question for down the line. I'd love to come back in a year and say, okay, there's clarity about what the regulations are. Schools are being visited. We know what's happening. And, sometimes when I feel like despondent. There were huge changes made to our education over the last decades, right? In the United States, you know, in terms of, you know, Brown versus Board of Ed and all those changes, right? So I don't know. I'm hopeful that it's not for naught and changes will actually be made, though it feels very big right now. But at least there's a conversation. You know, 10 years ago, there was no conversation about this, right? You might not have known. Like if you were not really in the community, you might not have known what was really going on, that education was truly, truly not available for these kids.
Yes, that is probably correct. And thanks to, you know, the gift of the internet, that we just are that much more connected to each other. So anyway, on that note, I want to thank you, Beatrice. People are asking how they can access the one pager that you have been referencing. I don't know if it's something that we can post in a PDF in the comments to this chat, and we can email it to those who have joined in by Zoom.
I wonder if I can put it on the chat. Let me see if I can put it. I think sometimes I've seen people put things on chats, but I don't know how to do that.
Well, we can paste it into the Facebook.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. Okay.
Great.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you, everybody else, for listening in. And you know what? We're going to take you up on your invitation that a year from now, we'll hopefully see, first of all, hopefully we'll have much better news from the state of health of the world in general. And second of all, that hopefully you'll be giving us a more positive update, both on your own court case, but also on the state of education in general.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you,
Beatrice.
Thank you, everybody. Stay healthy and stay well.
Amen. Bye.
Bye-bye.